I think it's going to be a really awesome program, like really unique. And this is sponsored by the Quincy Park Department and the Friends of the Souther Tide Mill. And I want Beverly Anderson, who is the president, to just say a few words about the Tide Mill. It's a great organization. I hope you all will join. I think she'll tell you about how you get involved. Go ahead, Beverly.
Thank you. Hi, it's great to be here tonight to talk to you about the Tide Mill. I'll be pretty quick. The Tide Mill is a Tide Mill, and we're the Friends of the Southern Tide Mill. We're a nonprofit trying to support programs in the restoration of the Tide Mill. And we'd be happy to have you learn more about it, and we've got a number of materials over there, including reproductions of two waysides, these large depictions of what went on at the mill in the past. And it includes a depiction of the granite slopes of the Quincy Canal, and also of how the Tide Mill itself worked. We also have over there some information packages as well as donation envelopes we do like to give to the Friends. So please contact any one of us. There are several of us here from the Friends, and we'd be happy to talk to you about it. Thank you.
So I'm Sally Owen, and for 24 years, every month, there has been a nature or historic tour, free, of something in Quincy. Is there anybody who's never been on one?
How many have been? How many have been?
No. Well, everyone, if they haven't said that, everyone said. Okay, so I still have a couple of spaces left for the tour tomorrow and the one on Saturday if anybody wants to sign up to see me afterwards. If you're not on our email list to get notified of the tours and you want to be on it, also see me afterwards. And now I'm just so grateful to Bob Damon. He is such an incredible resource in this city. And he did such a fantastic program on the Hancock Cemetery. I said, Bob, I really want you to do another one. I know you're really busy. What's a topic you know a lot about? And he said, the Souther Tide Mill. And so that's what we're having this talk tonight. So I'm going to introduce Bob, our city historian, and then he will introduce the other speaker tonight. Thank you so much, Bob.
All right, good evening, everyone. Nice to see you back here at the library. There's a lot of familiar faces here. Again, love to always be here and talk about the Tide Mill with the Friends of the Southern Tide Mill, the long-standing partners and mouthpieces in many ways, advocates for this really important historic resource here in the community. Before I get going, I want to say how pleased I am to be working with a good friend and colleague of mine in historic preservation, in public archaeology, and archaeology more broadly. If you have not heard, the state of Massachusetts does have an underwater archaeologist. And David has a very small job. This is David Robinson, and he has a very small job of covering every single resource that exists in the state of Massachusetts that's underwater. So, without further ado, introduce the man who's up to that task every day and does an incredible job. It's really wonderful work. David, please take it away.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bob, for that introduction. And it's really great to be here tonight with all of you. I'm sure Bob would agree that historic preservation doesn't happen without the support of people like yourselves, with the public's involvement. And your presence here tonight is greatly appreciated. I'm curious, whenever I give a public talk, and I do about 20 of these a year, I guess, I always ask the audiences, did you know you had a state underwater archaeologist? Raise your hand if you did. Okay, that's typically the response I get, which means I need to give a lot more of these presentations. How many of you knew that you had a state board of underwater archaeological resources here in Massachusetts? Same thing, a couple of people. Well, I'm here to try to help change that. Bob was kind enough to invite me to come talk and share with you a quick introduction about the Board of Underwater Archaeological Resources, or BUAR, a little bit about myself, and then talk about sites that we've got along the coast that are being impacted by climate change and sea level rise and erosion that comes along with it, much like the Southern Tide Mill is. And So I'm going to try to make this quick because I'm not the main event, Bob is. So no further ado. Yes, I am your state underwater archaeologist. My background, I've been a state underwater archaeologist now for just a little over 5 years. I started in 2019. And prior to that, I worked at the Graduate School of Oceanography at the University of Rhode Island as a marine researcher and underwater archaeologist. I was there for 7 years. While at the same time doing consulting underwater archaeology, most of my career has been spent as a consultant, as a underwater archaeological consultant. And I've worked for a variety of firms and maritime museums over the course of a 33-year career. My educational background, I did PhD coursework at the University of Connecticut in submerged settlements archaeology. I got my master's degree in nautical archaeology or shipwreck archaeology, ironically from a university in the Central Plains of Texas. Even more ironic that I'm from the ocean state. I'm a native Rhode Islander, and I got my bachelor's degree in anthropology and art at the University of Rhode Island. I did come into underwater archaeology as a diver. I've been a diver since I was 15 years old, and I have a family history of diving that spans 4 generations. So diving has been a critical part of what I've become and what I do. The Board of Underwater Archaeological Resources, or BUAR, was formed in 1973, and we are the sole trustee of the Commonwealth's underwater cultural heritage under state law. And our charge is with encouraging discovery, reporting, preservation, and protection of Massachusetts' underwater archaeological resources for your benefit, for the public's benefit. The board consists of myself as the director, and we have 9 members that represent the State Archaeologist's Office, the State Archivist's Office, the Director of DCR Waterways, the Director of Coastal Zone Management, the Chief of the Massachusetts Environmental Police, and the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Historic Commission, or their designees. We also have 3 governor-appointed public members, 2 recreational diving community representatives, and an at-large marine archaeologist. And the board has 1 staff. There's 1 person that does everything for the entire state, and that is also me. As Bob said, our jurisdiction is broad. We cover all of the state's coastal waters out to the federal state water boundary, as well as all the inland waters and wetlands. And within the intertidal zone, we share permitting authority with the Massachusetts Historical Commission. So everywhere you see this beige there, that's my responsibility. Underwater archaeological resources in Massachusetts are defined by law as abandoned properties, artifacts, treasure troves, or sunken ships that have remained unclaimed for 100 years or more, or which are valued at $5,000 or more, or any other objects 100 years old are judged by the board to be of historical value, which are located inside, upon, or around said resources within the inland or coastal waters of the Commonwealth, as defined by state law. Title to these resources belongs to all of you. The Commonwealth holds title to these resources, and this was reaffirmed by the federal ban on shipwreck. So what kind of underwater archaeological resources do we have in Massachusetts? Well, when I say that, I'm sure this is the first thing you think of, probably shipwrecks. And we have over 3,500 known wrecks that have been reported lost in our state waters. We also have ancient indigenous watercraft, like this Mashoon, or this dugout canoe that is in Lake Quincy, and submerged ancient landscapes. These are landscapes were flooded by post-glacial sea level rise, which has elevated water levels some 400 feet since ancient times, and so preserved elements of those landscapes do exist, and they do contain cultural sites. We also have historic coastal infrastructure, things like this East Boston marine railway, and historic aircraft wrecks. So it is illegal for anybody to remove, displace, damage, or destroy any underwater archaeological resources in our state waters, except in conformity with the permits that we issue. We issue 3 types of archaeological permits: reconnaissance permits for non-disturbance investigations, excavation permits that allow for the recovery and removal of underwater archaeological resources, and then something called a special use permit that we issue to professional archaeologists that are doing compliance survey work. Like so for all the wind farm projects that are happening off the coast, or dredging projects that are happening the professional underwater archaeologists that work on those projects to identify resources that might be impacted, they get special use permits. The permittees that we have include folks like that, as well as individual sport divers and lots of different types of folks who are interested in the underwater realm. So what do you do at work, Dave? This is a question I figured you probably had. We do a lot of project review. We see about 1,500 projects a year, everything from offshore wind farms to culvert replacements under roads and bridge replacements, harbor dredging, that we review and we assess for the potential for those projects to impact resources, and then we make recommendations as to whether or not survey is required. We also manage about 25 to 26 active permits a year, and we hold 5 public meetings a year. As I said, I do quite a bit of public education outreach, but apparently not enough based on the opinions that we saw a while ago. I do about 20 of these a year, and one of the ones, and I just did this program last Friday at the Crane Estate up in Ipswich. We developed a shipwreck scholars program for children ages 5 to 15, and that even included me penning an original sea shanty for the shipwreck site that we were looking at. And this is something that we've been doing now for 4 years with the trustees. We've also expanded it for grown-ups because kids had fun. We figured the big kids would also have fun. And I do a talk, and we do sunset walks out to the site, and we do sing with the grown-ups too. We also do field work. I'm out in the fields. Last year I did investigations in 10 different communities. We are becoming authorized to conduct diving operations, scientific diving operations under the jurisdiction of the Division of Marine Fisheries diving program. And we work with a number of different groups. We're actually in the process of starting a program to tag shipwrecks, to keep track of these timbers that show up on beaches. We engage with the tribes. I communicate regularly with the Massachusetts Commission on Indian Affairs, and also communicate and coordinate with the federally and state recognized tribes. And the UAR is a member of the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, which is the parent agency that our board is a part of. We're administratively hosted by Coastal Zone Management, but we're a part of the EA, and we're on their tribal working group. And then we have a tribal community that is a permittee of ours, the Asmanisco and Nipmucks. They have been a permittee since 2001 for their investigations of that machine that I showed you. We do a lot of federal and state agency coordination, where we provide and receive technical advice from organizations like the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, DCR, DNF, NRC, NOAA, Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary, Park Service out on the Cape Cod National Seashore, and the U.S. Coast Guard. And we are currently working on a project discussion Meredith will tell you about in a second. So one of the questions I also get, besides what do you do for your job, David, is what can I do to be involved or help out? And one of the best ways that you can get involved in underwater archaeology here in the state is to go to our website, and if you see something along the shoreline while you're by the water's edge, contact us. I have business cards. I'm going to be happy to give and share with anybody that wants one. I'm also going to give you the website address in a second. But we have something called the Shoreline Heritage Identification Partnership Strategy Program, or SHIPS. These are online forms that you can quickly download and fill out. They're one-pagers. They're very easy. They provide basic information to us about the sites that you might find when you're out and about. So that's one really important way that you could get involved. Our website, we're really easy to find. Just Google MABUAR. Will pop up. The web page has a lot of information on it. It's a robust website. And I welcome you to take a look at it. And also, there's contact information from me, so please feel free. I would love to hear from you. And if you find anything, please do get in touch with me. Okay, so to tie into what the topic of our conversation is tonight, one of the major management and research focal points of the job that I've been in now for the last 5 years has been thinking about and trying to address threats from sea level rise-related erosion, and not only the natural processes that impact coastal cultural resources, things like hurricanes that stay strong way north from where they used to, king tides that rise much higher than we've seen in the past, these natural forces, but also the human responses to those threats to life and property. We know there's a lot of effort going on now within the state and really all over the country and in other parts of the world even to try to enhance coastal resiliency, to try to either replenish beaches or to build up shorelines with stone or to create natural shorelines. All these things, while they help protect property and life, they have an impact. And fragile cultural resources along the coast that were waterlogged can be damaged or destroyed by these efforts. So the threat is really coming from two different directions. It's coming both from natural causes, but also from human responses. I hadn't been in the job very long when I started to get calls from folks telling me that, oh, I've found something eroded along the shoreline. And so I started to plot where these were. I go out, document them, record their locations, and the larger map of the state you see here with all the red stars, those are just sites that have been reported within the time frame from 2019 to 2023. If you look at the little inset map to the left, that's from a 2015 study that CZM did where they identified sections of the Massachusetts coastline that were eroding at the highest rates. And so if you just visually have your eyes dance between those two images, you can intuitively see that the North Shore is a place where there's a lot of erosion happening, and it's also a place where we're getting a lot of reports, a cluster of reported sites being impacted. Same thing for the Outer Cape, same thing for here in Quincy. This became crystal clear when the site that we do the Shipwreck Scholars Program on, where we're trying to make lemonade from lemons, where we had this amazing shipwreck that had been in this location for 110 years, slowly became more and more exposed over time as the beach was eroding, and then during the passage of a hurricane offshore and king tide, the site looked like this overnight. It was literally destroyed overnight. So I wish I could tell you that's the only place that this has happened, but it was the first one that was most dramatic. The second one came when I got a call from Bob to tell me about the southern tide mill, which has been impacted by sea level rise as well. But this is a problem that is statewide. It's an issue out on the vineyard, where we have ancient sites that are eroding from bluffs there. It's an issue within Cape Cod Bay and places like Plymouth, where, again, ancient sites are eroding. Marshfield, we've got a shipwreck and an ancient landscape that's being impacted by erosion. Nantucket, shipwrecks along the South Shore that are becoming exposed. Fish weirs up on the North Shore, very unique type of resource that have been exposed and destroyed by erosion. Shipwrecks also on the North Shore, this one in Essex, this one in Gloucester, and these are actively eroding sites. They are, in the time that I've been monitoring them, they are becoming more and more exposed. And as I said, here in Quincy, we've got the southern tide mill, which Bob's going to tell you all about in detail the impacts that are happening to it. So I just wanted to give you a sense that it's not just here in Quincy, it's not just the southern tide mill that is being impacted, and we are faced with trying to figure out how do we manage these sites, what do we do? In an effort to try to get a handle on answering that question and being proactively strategic as opposed to reactive, like I had to do when the K. Damon, that shipwreck up in Ipswich, was destroyed overnight. We started, my colleagues and I at CZM, we started to think about, and talking with Bob as well, about trying to get a handle on this issue. And one of the ways that we thought would be a good way to approach this was for us as a state agency to look at the entire coastal zone of the state and look at where coastal change is most likely to be happening and compare that with where we know previously documented sites have been recorded. And by comparing those two things, then we could assess which parts of the coast had the greatest vulnerability, where were cultural resources along the coast most likely to be impacted by changes that are happening to the coast. So we applied in 2023 for funding for a project of special merit to NOAA, and we were awarded the grant. And so for about the last quite a year, we've been working on trying to develop this assessment model and working with Bob. He's been helping with us right from the get-go. It's been a huge assistance to us in that project. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to turn things over to Bob. And I think questions probably we can wait until the very end. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to switch over to a little bit more Quincy-specific piece. But I want to warn you ahead of time that I'm not here to tell you that I have any answers with regard to this topic. We are still in the midst of a really important and significant process of thinking about the realities, the causes, the impacts that are related to one of the last vestiges of early 19th century commercial and colonial activity here in the city of Quincy. It's not something that we take lightly, and it's not something that we're going to rush, because it is that significant and that important. And it's also incredibly, incredibly complicated. And so today, what I want to talk a little bit about is just spend some time, not a lot of time in the past and not a lot of time in the story of the mill itself, but in the present and how we ensure that this historic structure, the reasons why it has been cared for by community groups and individuals, is going to continue on in a way that is, shall we say, equal in merit to the building and its story and the story of the place that it occupies. I'm going to begin here, just around the year 2000. So about 25 years ago, there, ladies and gentlemen, is the Southern Tidal. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the Southern Tide Mill this past winter. Notice anything that looks similar? What? I'm sorry, I'm an old school teacher. I'm just going to ask the throw-out questions and expect you to answer. So, what's familiar? What's similar here?
The roof.
Water.
Ah. Now, in between there and there, that building was raised almost 3 feet. So back in 2001, an amazing group of individuals, some remarkable engineers, and a very cool company who usually builds old barns up in New Hampshire, rebuilt that. They put a new layer, 2 new layers of granite foundation underneath it. They shored up and reestablished the frame that was underneath that building, and led to the opportunity for it to look like that. By the way, this picture is taken not during a crazy high tide. It's taken after a 2-inch rain event. And it just so happens to be high tide. It's not a particularly high tide. The tides here are pretty big, which is why there's a tide mill there. Their average is somewhere between 7 and 9 feet. I think it was 9.1 feet scheduled for that day. This is just a volume of water coming out of Town Brook. and showing up at the other part of town. So, for tonight, as I mentioned, while our topic is historical, that is a building that dates back to 1854. And it sits on a site that has had active mills on it since somewhere between 1802 and 1806. We're going to talk a little bit about what tide mills are. Those of you who already know, I'm going to beg your forgiveness while I review that. And for those of you who don't, I'm sorry, I'm going to go a little bit fast. I'm also going to do a shtick that you probably heard me, if you heard me talk before, that I'm just going to continue to repeat, and it's going to be a drum that I beat until I'm done in this work, which is talking about the nature of historic heritage. Because I don't think that we can fully understand what it takes to maintain and care for historic resources if we don't understand the systems in our culture and in our country that establish and label and protect historic heritage. You now know the answer to that question. And I'm hoping that we can spend some time at the end of the session today with your questions, but also talking together a little bit how we unpack this significant challenge. I'm not here to say that I'm the expert on the stage and I've got the answers for any of this, because I don't. It's a much smarter guy than he's sitting next to me, and he's asking a lot of big questions, and so if he's asking all those questions, I'm just trying to catch up.
It's a conversation.
So, let's jump right in. What is a tidal mill? A tidal mill really has three different parts. It's a water-powered industrial structure usually designed to grind grains or cut wood. That's what it is. It's a simple industrial building that has a job. And before we had steam and before we had electricity, it was a really, really important set of jobs. And if you lived on the coast, you had either an unreliable stream or a flood, if you had that. And so what do you have that's predictable? Every 12 hours, you've got a tide. That's great in one way, unless you're actually the mill. Because sometimes that tide is coming in at 3 a.m., sometimes at noon, sometimes at midnight. So, the three different parts. A tidal mill needs a dam and gates to trap the tidal waters that are going to power the mill. First and most important thing it needs, and the first and most important part of what makes a mill, tidal mill. It needs a power system for converting the energy, the potential energy that is in that trapped water into mechanical energy to do the work of the mill. And last but not least, while it sounds silly, it sounds obvious, you need a building to hold all the stuff that's doing the work for you. You need a structure that's going to help to fulfill all of that. So, when we talk about the Southern Tide Mill, and we talk about it as a historic building and as a historic structure, it's not just the building there, ladies and gentlemen. Next to that structure and underneath all that water are the remnants of a dam and the remnants of the power system. So it's not just the building that we're talking about here when we talk about the mill and the challenges related to sea level rise. So really quickly, a couple things here just to show you. We're talking about a mill, dam, and gates. People who built stuff back then were really brilliant. Oh, wow. These gates swung open when the tide came in. And when the tide went slack and was about to go out, they shut. Nobody's going to be there to do anything. They do all that work for you. Over here we have a wonderful drawing that came from an archaeological study that was done just before the tide mill was raised up those 3 feet back in 2001. Part of a set of drawings related to and came out of examinations of the old lock and dam related to the canal that would eventually be built nearby the Southern Tide Mill in the 1820s. There's how that dam and gates look. There are other better pictures, but for some reason I really like this one because of the flow of the water and the sense of where those gates are and the general location relative to the rest of what's here. What don't you see in that picture?
CVS.
You don't see CVS, so that's looking the opposite way from CVS. You don't see a car dealership. You don't see boats parked along there. It gives you a sense, in some ways, of the broader landscape in which this operation was built. This was an intertidal marsh. By the way, one of the earliest pieces of, shall we say, legislation designed to incent economic commerce helped to build this particular piece. They were called the colonial ordinances. And something that drives certain people in Massachusetts completely bonkers. Because if you bought shoreline property, what does it mean you own in Massachusetts? Oh, no, go think the opposite.
Low
You
tide.
own to the water line, low water line. So what does that incent people to do? That incents people to build out into the waterways and create structures that can be used for commerce because you know that you own it, the state does not. And so this piece of property right here that you can see right here, that was made by humans. That extension out off of the tide mill and out over the salt marshes that look like this, look like humans. All right, I can move faster. So, converting kinetic energy into machine energy. I love this stuff, but I couldn't explain it to you from a physics point of view if I had saved my life to do so. But it's actually pretty simple. Here we have the dam. You lift up a gate, water runs through the flume or the sluice, hits a wheel, spins it around. That spins your axle. That's spinning, doing the work up here that you need to do. When I talk to you about things that were under the water, here they are. Here's the portion of the mill dam underneath the mill. Two sluice gates were right here. You can see one of the power shafts right there. The other one right over here. There's that power shaft. Down in underneath, we believe there's still remnants of the turbines and the tubs that help. Up here, one of the gear shafts that would have gone to turn larger gears, in this case, to power machinery that's in a building about 25 yards away. And last but not least, the building. Now, this isn't a really great picture. It's really hard to see. But see these large timbers here? They're part of what's called a Hearst frame. And were installed in the building for a very specific purpose. They need to hold up the millstones. They need to hold up those very heavy pieces of natural material that are doing the work of grinding the grain. They're an essential piece of how the building works. What do we have here? We have two pieces of remnants of what was called an Evans system. It was a very sophisticated at the time system of pulleys with all different kinds of ways. Here's the third floor, there's the second floor, to be transporting ground grain up to the attic where it was going to go be dispersed and cooled, and also helping to bring grain down to be ground here at the Hearst Spring. All of it powered by right here. So two wheels, we've got two turbines, one that's grinding the grain, and the other that's powering all of the machinery that's helping to automate that process. Yes?
How did the grain stay dry?
In what sense?
Once it was ground, how did it stay dry and not mold?
So when I don't want to get too far off on this for the moment, but when grain gets ground, it's actually hot. It needs to cool. So it's got to go up and have that heat disperse. So it's releasing a lot of that moisture at that point.
Thank you.
That's actually a constant issue for, if you're a miller, your stones, the heat of your stones, and the heat of what you're grinding are a constant thing that you're monitoring. In some ways, for better and for worse, for the tidal mill, you have a little bit of natural air conditioning. Not a lot. Yes?
What type of wood would they use for that, so it didn't rot or anything?
Good question. So, anybody from the tide mill, friends of the tide mill, what do we got here on the second floor as the posts?
My understanding was white pine for most of the building.
White pine most of the building, but some of the old posts, cedar, or cedar. This building was maintained and kept, this particular building maintained and kept by a shipbuilding family. They knew what they were doing in terms of dealing with wood that was going to be in contact with water. So, a lot, and they would use what they had to hand in lots of different ways. Some of the posts, some of the things, the older post pieces that you're seeing here are cedar. All right, so I'm going to move away from the building now, and I'm going to go off and get a little, shall we say, historic preservation wonky on you. Because we're talking about and feeling passionate about a structure like this. There's this whole other set of language and vocabulary and values that directly impact this thing. Because that's a piece of historic heritage. And as a piece of historic heritage, it is different than its history. And I'm going to talk about what that is about and what that means in just a second. So how are history and historic heritage different? Again, for those of you who have seen this before, I apologize. I'm doing it probably for some of you like the 10th time. History is a general study of the past. It's about all the stuff that ever happened. We may not focus on all the stuff that ever happened. We may focus on some very specific things, but that's what it's about. Historic heritage is very different. It is the stuff that we think is important enough that we kept it around. For any of us who've ever had to move in the second half of our lives, we know the deal there. History is based on facts and evidence about the past. We can talk about what kind of material the building was made out of. We can talk about what kind of machinery was used, which inventions they took, all that kind of wonderful stuff. Heritage is about the value that we place on it. And that's very, very important because now we're talking about making choices. What things from your parents or your aunts or your uncle's attics do you decide to keep and what pieces are going off to the local yard sale? I'm being very simplistic about that, but this is what it's about. This is one of the few buildings of its age left. History is about and comprised of the past as a whole. Heritage is about an expression of our values in the present. So, historic stuff is from way back there, but the heritage part of it is what we're doing now and what we're choosing to do. So 2 + 2 = 4. What we value from the past and what we preserve to hand on to those in the future. So I'm going to try to move through this quickly. There are 2 different types of heritage value that I want to talk about. First is heritage significance. What makes something from the past significant? Here in the United States, there is a federal agency responsible for overseeing all of that. It's the National Park Service and the Department of the Interior. They have all the standards. You may have heard it in terms of as the National Register for Historic Places. Okay? Those are the standards, and there's a whole set of routines that I'm going to bore you with that are related to establishing why and how something is historically significant. If you don't meet the requirements, then sorry, it's not, no matter how much you like it, and how much you think it's important. So, historical significance, an important piece of this. And by the way, it's important to remember that this is still something that is related to this act of value. It takes time, it takes learning, it takes other things to get to this place of knowing and enacting these particular values. The second, I think, is probably the easier one for us to access. This idea of the benefits that come from these things. Well, of course, it's something old and really important, and why would it not be important for us to have? Right? Some of us understand this intellectually, some of us understand it emotionally, some of us, maybe it's a very, very important part of who we are. This notion of not losing these critical elements or threads that connect us to those who came before. And, by the way, I think the other piece of this is that this has very tangible appeal in lots of different ways. So I just went to the city of Cappadocia in the central Anatolian region of Turkey. I was there just a little while ago. My uncle lives in Turkey, so I had the chance to go there. Most people go to Cappadocia these days not to see the 1,700-year-old homes that have been built into the volcanic rock formations. They go there to ride in a balloon at 4:45 a.m. But the thing that ends up happening by accident is that they then go to that other stuff. And all of those amazing places in this very relatively remote volcanic area of central Anatolia in Turkey. And the stories related to the very, very early Christian communities that ran up into the Anatolian steppe because they were going to get killed otherwise, end up being heard by people because they showed up there to ride in a balloon because they heard it was really pretty. And there's some interesting intersections of tourism, resources, right? The individuals who live in this area are really benefiting, and the culture and their history and their past are benefiting from this combination, this intersection of these things. So just another example of that. I think it's also important for us to think about these particular historic sites in our community as your assets. They are your communities, whatever you want to call it, but they are valuable elements of your community in any of the ways that you want to define that. Right? So as individuals, or as a group, or as the National Park Service, or as the Department of Interior, we're going to put official labels on things. We can put official labels on things. By the way, I try to ask this every single time. If your house is on the National Historic Register, does that mean you can't knock it down? It does not. You can have a house that's considered to be nationally historically significant. If you don't think it's that significant, you want to build something newer that looks like something else, you can go right ahead and knock it down. How does that work in the United States? That's a value choice. We're all about carrots, no sticks. We're going to incent you. We're going to give you tax rebates to rebuild your original windows or do all these other kinds of things. We want you, in the United States, we want you to value those things and make a value-related choice. It doesn't always happen that way. The one I get a million questions about, anybody want to take a guess what it is? Here in this community, and right in Wollaston, the Wollaston Theater. Whatever happened to that? Why did that happen? That was a horrible travesty. Well, because the people who owned it didn't value it. And they valued it more as something to sell. And that's how it works. And so Part of the reason why I belabor some of these things is because if you do, then you need to say so. I mean, be active and encourage you to be a part of those things. I think the other piece for us to remember is that there is an economic element to this. There are a lot of really interesting sociology studies, particularly done in Belgium, in the Netherlands, and in the UK, that have said that places where people have preserved more of their community's past feel more comfortable to live in. People value them as neighborhoods and places to go and live and to be. There are places where there's more homeowner satisfaction, greater intergenerational wealth. All kinds of amazing things happen as a result of historic heritage being preserved. So we think about those assets, and then we start to think about heritage in a different way. All of a sudden, the heritage becomes a resource. It has something to give us. It has something to give back to us. Joining Dave to go sing sea shanties on a beautiful evening at a beach in Essex. Sounds like a pretty good way to spend an evening. A lot of fun. All right, so I'm going to shift over for just a minute now and go back to the tidal again. Now that we have some of these ideas in mind, this idea of valuing, this idea of we're now talking about a community asset or something that has the potential to be a resource for us in a number of different ways, now things start to get messy. So I'm going to start with the Reader's Digest version of the history of the Southern Tidal. And I'm going to go through it quickly because I want to get to the more interesting pieces of this. My friends from the Friends of the Southern Tidal, please excuse me while I rush through what is a lot of really important details because I don't have time to get to them all. So, somewhere between 1802 and 1806, Ebenezer Thayer, yes, that Thayer Academy, all that kind of good stuff. He's a really smart land speculator. He buys up around 40 acres worth of land on Upper Town River and on Town Brook. He, interestingly and coincidentally, gets the legislature to approve him to build a dam, damming up Town River, and then, surprise, surprise, all of a sudden, there's a tide mill on the land that he bought. In 1814, Thayer sells the mill to a Charlestown merchant, David Stetson, who, having lived in Charlestown, has no idea what he's getting into when he comes down to Quincy. It's way too much for him to handle, and he finds a buyer. That buyer is a man named John Souther. John Souther is from a shipbuilding family in Hingham. He's looking for his own place to expand his building operations, and for the next 70 years, the Southers have what you would call a small, minor family industrial complex going on at the end of Town Brook. Why? He's building a lot of really important and significant ships right out of that area that I was pointing to. Remember when I said that this part was made by humans? And at the same time, he's got a side gig grinding grain. And at the same time that side gig is grinding grain, it's also providing power for him for himself. John Souther has a prominent seat in the United First Parish Church. He's on the building committee for what is now the Church of the Presidents. He is in almost every prominent role and position here in the community. So for the next 70 years, he and his sons, in this sort of strange cascade of son taking over and then father or older brother taking over from the younger brother, are working this property. In 1823, 1826, another really interesting windfall for the Souther family, the Quincy Canal is built. Built and designed by the brother of one of the designers of the Middlesex Canal. The wooden landings that would be built at the head of the canal, as well as the locks, would be built by one cousin of John Adams, Josiah Adams, who was a well-known builder. In 1846, the original tie mill building and the sawmill would be lost to fire. Henry Souther would rebuild the mill on much of the original floor framing, and he would be the one who would be adding those 2 new turbines that I was talking about, and the grain and meal machinery, the Evans Works. In 1888, the settlers sold the property to Maine lumber merchant Benjamin Johnson, who would transform the property into a working lumber yard. And between 1912 and 1983, the property would operate as Quincy Lumber Company. It was almost single-handedly responsible for developing much of South and West Quincy. In 1993, as part of a flood mitigation program, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers would remove the western half of the lock and gates and other remnants of the original tide mill dam as part of a flood mitigation project. In 1999 and 2000, CVS would purchase the land for the pharmacy project and would convey 4 acres to what was then the Southern Tide Mill Historical Association, the first formal organization that we will be responsible for valuing and caring for that site. In 2001, we've already seen and talked about it a little bit, a major restoration and stabilization project would go on at Southern Tide Mill, raising it 2 to 3 feet and replacing much of the first floor frame. In 2007, many of you probably know about this already, a devastating fire would pretty much wipe out the entire remnants of what was the Quincy Lumber Company. The fire department in Quincy just so happened to know that there's a certain building they should really work on to try to save it if they did. In 2010 and 2011, the northern bay of the tide mill literally fell into Town Brook. After a major reconstruction process, the entire northern end will be rebuilt, and new roofing and new siding, and the current look of the tide mill will come down around that time. It is still in that condition today. So, ladies and gentlemen, thinking, now we've done that quick little history, we've talked a little bit about this idea of things having significance and value. We got an interesting problem to deal with here in this coastal resource. This mill was built here because it would have access to that. But now that might take this mill away from here. So, what do we do with a historic structure and with its archaeological resources underneath it and its former dam and lock, when what makes it significant, what makes it historical, what makes it eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places is also going to threaten to take it down and drop it into the ocean? What do we do about that? Historic preservation doesn't have an answer for that question. It's normally not that way. We could pick this building up and we could move it 3 streets over. But what would happen if we did that? What does it lose?
The water, what they needed for.
Yes, all of those things. Because it was built as a tide mill. But if it stays there, and 2 weeks from now, a freak hurricane comes up the East Coast and picks it up and floats it out, it's gone. So the questions about what we do in the kind of the preservation context related to how we care for this building, because by the way, over the course of the last 5 years, we have redocumented all the archaeological resources underneath this building. We've had it structurally assessed. We've had the entire thing measured and drawn and photographed so that if it does disappear tomorrow, we could tell the State Historical Commission that yes, we have documented every single inch of that building upside down, backwards, forwards, inside, and out. We've done all of that, but now we still have this question of what do we do? how do we continue to keep the value and the significance of this piece that has been so carefully saved and cared after by members of this community moving into the future? Because we're not stopping this. Nope, by 2050, that's high tide, ladies and gentlemen. But the question that we're wrestling with now is this larger question of a building that has its identity on the coast, has its identity connection to the status, is being threatened by that coast. And so when I started my introduction today, it was about this idea of we're not going to move quickly with this because this is a complicated thing that we need to try to figure out. And we're talking to a lot of different smart people, and we're talking to local community groups, and we'll be having a couple of community fora just simply to talk about not only this building, but the site that was built by people that extends out into the river. And how are we going to use it? All right, so I've already gone a little further than I wanted to, but I wanted to, and to say that that's give you a sense of this is just one building. David has thousands, thousands of those kinds of structures. And by the way, if we're talking about Quincy, and we're talking about Quincy's shoreline, we're talking about Quincy's coastline, we're talking about the home to the Massachusetts. We're talking about some of the wealthiest areas in Massachusetts 500 years ago, 600 years ago. Right, so my good friend Ellen from the DCR, she calls Boston Harbor indigenous people's Whole Foods. Because of the wealth of resources that are there. That means there's also a significant level of resources related to people who came here and were here long before Europeans were. Right here in this community as well. I just happen to be talking about this because I'm not an archaeologist, but it's out there. And so this is one space that we're thinking about, but there are plenty more to be thinking about as well. So, but I want to stop and open it up for your questions, your thoughts, your comments for David and I both.